All right, good morning. It's a great day to be a developer, don't you think? Good. I've kind of thought that all my career. I kind of woke up almost every morning, I think of my workaday life, and I could probably say, it's a great day to be a developer. I've loved being a developer because we have this unique opportunity to enable business processes to change the way people do work, hopefully for the better. Hopefully they don't walk away cursing our code and what they have to work with. Hopefully they walk away at the end of the day going, wow, my day is better because so-and-so wrote that software for me. Software, the cool thing about software to me is that it allows people to do what people are good at. It allows them and frees them up to do the kinds of things people should be doing, like thinking, making decisions, interacting, collaborating, and let the machine do the stuff that people don't have to shuffle and work around with anymore. Let the machine do the kinds of things that are redundant, repetitive types of activities, and then we get to write software that helps people do better people kinds of things and make decisions and change the way the world works and change business functions and things like that, hopefully to make them more optimal. So to me, today is a great day to be a developer, even yet today, because we have this unique opportunity to be able to interact and adopt new technologies and bring new types of solutions into the world that have never been there before. So I love development, and I love being a developer. Now, my name is Donovan Follett. I'm a technical evangelist. I'm based out of Redmond. And I have a role in Microsoft where I have the opportunity to work with our partners that are adopting our technologies before those technologies ever become public. So I have the opportunity to work with our partners so that they can be building on our latest releases so that once we ship, they can ship as well. So it's a very enjoyable role. I enjoy it very much. And part of that role is also being able to come and talk to you and carry the message of the new technologies that we have built out into public forums like this once we do go public. So I enjoy that role. Thank you for spending the time with me this morning. Nice, bright and early. And making it all the way down here to the end. When I came in this morning, the lights were out, and I thought, my goodness. Finally, I saw that, yeah, we are going to have a session in this room. I saw it on the board. So thanks for coming up and being a part of this. So today what I want to do is kind of tie together, hopefully, a number of things that you have already seen this week. If you've attended any of the previous Apps for Office, Apps for SharePoint types of sessions, you've seen some of these principles, and all I'm going to do today is pull those principles and those concepts together into a end-to-end solution, and then I'm going to go back and show you the different places of how that solution is tied together. But it's not just a solution for SharePoint. It is also a solution that includes Windows Azure, it includes Windows 8, it includes Windows push notification services, it includes Workflow Manager that runs in Windows Azure now if you're running workflows in SharePoint and Office 365. It includes this whole array of these technologies. Because one of the things when we first came out with this new app model for SharePoint, one of the things people were saying was, man, I don't know if it's going to be quite powerful enough for me to do good stuff. Well, I just want to show you, you can tie these things together and do some very, very unique and exciting things with the new app model. Now, when we were working with SharePoint, in the past, historically, we wrote farm-level solutions, those trusted farm-level solutions. And those required full trust on the platform. And that's great on SharePoint Farm solutions in on-premises. But those solutions, as you know, would not run in the cloud. So in 2010, we introduced the sandbox model, and the sandbox model allowed code to run out in the cloud, but people really, really strained under that under that set of restrictions that the sandbox put on you. And rightly so. And ISVs had a hard time truly writing solutions that were sandbox solutions that could do a lot of stuff because the client-side object model and coming back into SharePoint was limited and restrictive. So with SharePoint 2013, with this new cloud app model, we now have this opportunity to get your code executing completely outside of SharePoint, and then we have greatly broadened and deepened the APIs for SharePoint so that you can come back into SharePoint and be able to do the kinds of things that you wanted to do. Still not full trust level types of things you could do with farm solutions. However, let me know if you can't do something you want to do. That's one of the things that when I talk to our program managers that drive the API set and look at the OAuth model for SharePoint, one of the things they say is, hey, if you hear out there talking to people that there's something we cannot do or that they cannot do, then let us know about it because this is the way we want to be able to work those things in as much as possible. So let me know. I'll just say right up front, if we kind of run up close to the end and we maybe run out of time, we'll see. I am going to be down in the booth right after this, the Office booth, the apps booth in the Office section. I'll stay there all day if you're going to be there, okay, and you want to talk about this stuff. So I'm here for you. I just want this to be something that you understand and you can take away and have a good sense of where we're going with this app model. Okay, with that, what I'm going to do is start out, first of all, I'll show you an end-to-end demo that ties a bunch of these technologies together. I'll set the context for apps for SharePoint, and essentially I'm just going to kind of bring a quick review of maybe some of the things and pull some of the things together that you have learned already this week. And then from there we'll go ahead and break it down and we'll look at the different pieces of code that execute and make a demo like this happen. Now, the key takeaway here is that really and truly I believe, and I've been in lots of parts of the world this year talking to developers about building on the new app model and using the new app model to build solutions. And really, you know, it is kind of if you're hearing it for the first time, you kind of go, whoa, I don't know that I like that. But really, once you start moving in it and working with it, then it really is a way to build and consume SharePoint as a service better than ever before. So it is a way to build out new types of solutions that could not have been built before, but also thinking of SharePoint now as a service. It's just another big service that is sitting out there that has all kinds of good things that SharePoint does that you can interact with now with standard web technologies such as OAuth, okay, and such as just using CSS or JavaScript, but also being able to reach back into SharePoint from deep, rich web applications that are running on your platform in any language that you want to write them in, and hosted anywhere on any server that you want to host them on. You have those opportunities now. So you aren't restricted to just simply Microsoft technologies. Use whatever technologies you want and come into SharePoint as a service using standard web technologies. So the scenario that is just the backdrop for this demo then is that we have a company that desires to be able to have their salespeople be able to know the status of leads as they enter the system, these sales leads as they come into the system. And they want to be able to track those leads and be notified of those leads and then be able to work against those sales leads through the life cycle of that lead. And they wanted to do a 100% cloud solution. So they have some Windows Azure that they have available to them. They have Office 365. They know about Windows notifications, push notification services. They have all new Windows 8 computers on their laps. And so they are ready to go with their cloud-based solution. So with this slide here, it's a little bit busy and it's doesn't show up on the screen quite like I'd like it to show. But the far to right columns are what we would think of as services that are running in the cloud. And then on the the leftmost column, that is the client. So on the client, we have a WinJS Windows application. And with that application, we present to our salespeople, we present these leads in a way that they can instantly know what status that lead is in, which companies have which projects going on, and with that with that Windows 8 application, they can also use it to create the estimates so that a statement of work can be generated on the back end. So that's the Windows 8 client. And then we also have Microsoft Word on the desktop, of course, and that has a small little app for Office in it. It's not real spectacular, and maybe if you've seen some of the other demos, the help desk demo, that actually has a more rich view of apps for Office in it than this demo does, but it's okay. It's using the same types of technologies. But then in our cloud components, if we look at the middle column here, we have Office 365. And Office 365 has two parts to it. We have the Office 365 internal site, which we would kind of think of as like the behind the firewall site. So that's the main site where all of the employees are going to be using. And that has a number of elements on it, just SharePoint, collaborative, regular SharePoint artifacts on it that the employees or the salespeople are going to work with. Then we also have a second site, because with every Office 365 site, there's also a public-facing site. And on the public-facing site, we present a request for quote so that our customers can come to our public-facing site and they can submit a quote. They want us to be able to do some business for them, and that request for quote then essentially becomes a sales lead that we want to be able to track all the way through up through to a project being created. So that's our Office 365 SharePoint. On the far right-hand side, this is what I like to think of as our Windows Azure middle tier backbone. Okay, so this is really the backbone for all of the work that's going to be going on and managing this process end to end. So we have two Windows Azure websites. One website is a provider-hosted site that is for the public, is an app for SharePoint that is for the public-facing site. So apps can be installed on the public-facing site. We also have a second MVC4 app that is what we think of as our middle tier layer, and that is for our internal site to be able to use. Okay, so we have that app installed on the internal site. So we have two Windows Azure websites that are running MVC4 web apps. We also have Workflow Manager in the mix here. So our solution has a workflow that is being run, and this is a SharePoint 2013 workflow. It's a part of the app. So workflows can be part of your app, and that workflow is going to do some things for us. It's going to automatically create a statement of work as soon as we estimate, the salesperson estimates the bid in the Windows 8 app. Then we have Windows Azure Access Control. Windows Azure Access Control is used for our OAuth endpoint. Okay, so this is where our app is going to be able to be trusted by SharePoint, and before our app can access any SharePoint data, then we have to first do that OAuth dance, which says, yes, this app is trusted. It can come into SharePoint and treat it as a service. It can come into SharePoint and do the business and the kinds of things it has been trusted to do based on the permissions it requested when it was installed. And we'll see all that. Okay, and then lastly, I have a Windows Azure SQL database. And the Windows Azure SQL database is the database where we store all of our sales leads. Okay? Are we good on that? Okay. So there's a lot of pieces here. Let's see it come together. Okay, so here I have a branded, and that's not coming up very well, but this does say Contoso compressor up here. So I have my Contoso compressor site, and this is the public-facing site. So you can see here up in the URL, this is the public site for my SharePoint.com address. And this public site is where my employees, not my employees, this is where my customers can come because I have this app for Office out here, which essentially is the MVC4 public-facing app that I want my customers to be able to use. They can come here and they can go ahead and enter a request for quote. So I'll go ahead and click on the request for quote, and you can see that although this is a provider, this is a provider-hosted app, this app is actually running out on is running out on Windows Azure websites. Okay, so you can see my URL. It's running out on Windows Azure websites, but it looks like it's a part of SharePoint. Okay, and this is one of the pieces that when you write provider-hosted apps, this is one of the pieces that you need to know about as a developer. What we have is this Chrome control. So you can see the Chrome control, and this Chrome control will match whatever the CSS and whatever the styling or the theme is of the SharePoint site. If we didn't have the Chrome control at the top that says back to site, then we would just be another website that they click the link on and boom, we're out of context now. We wouldn't realize that, oh gosh, yeah, we went out to this other site. In this case, the site is wrapped with this Chrome control, takes the CSS, takes the styling of the site. So although we are executing on a Windows Azure website, using the Chrome control, we have a way back. Now this Chrome control is customizable. It's just JavaScript. This Chrome control is customizable. You can add additional things to it. You can do your own. But with a provider-hosted app where your code is running off the box and you're coming back into SharePoint for whatever business you need to do there, you need to let the user have an experience that looks like SharePoint. And the Chrome control is a way to do that. And you need to have a way for to get back to SharePoint easily. So in this case, if I just simply click, back to site, I am directly back on my SharePoint site now, and from the user's perspective, it is a seamless type of user experience. So I'll go ahead and click on Request for Quote, and we'll go TechEd Fix. The company is Fabricam, typically. Okay, and we're going to do some work. And the person is, let's just go John j@d.com. It doesn't make any difference at this point. Industry is housing. And we have a date picker here. So we're just going to pick a date when we want the project to start. Let's start it on May 20th or on June 20th. And we'll go ahead and submit. Now when I submit this, a number of things are going to happen. But when I submit it, one of the first things you're going to see is we're going to get this toast message up here that a project was created, okay? It says a project was created, and go ahead and create an estimate for this company called Fabricam. So what we've done from that MVC4 app is we have sent a push, we have called into another MVC4 app, which pushed out a notification through push notification services. So now my salespeople recognize and realize that, oh, okay, I've got a new sales lead that's entered into the system. So with that, we'll go ahead and go back to the site here. But now let me just kill this guy. Let me go back to my desktop. And now here is my Contoso Windows 8 app. Okay, so this is my sales tool. Now you'll notice on here that I have some tiles that are this tile that has rotating essentially JavaScript information on here. One, it says a sales lead has been entered into the system, but then it has both a year-to-date KPI and a quarterly KPI where it's actually reaching back into an Excel spreadsheet that is based under SharePoint, and it's reaching back into that Excel spreadsheet, and it's getting me this sales data, and it's pushing it out into this tile. So anytime I create a new lead, it updates the tile with new information. Anytime I get a new estimate created, it will also push out the new tile. So right here in my Windows 8 app, I can see what's been happening with my sales. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And when I click on that, my Windows 8 app reaches out to my database, my sales leads database, but it actually hits an endpoint, a REST OData endpoint on my middle tier MVC4 app, and it grabs this data and it brings it back. And we'll look at that in a little bit. And it formats it so that I can see here that I have Fabricam, and these are all the projects that I have going for Fabricam. Here's Litware. If I click into Litware, it pulls, again, these charts are just being pulled directly out of my Excel file that's sitting out on SharePoint. It pulls in the charts for Litware so I can see the yearly revenue and the quarterly revenue. And I can even drill into each of these and I can see, well, an estimate has already been created, and here's some, it's got revenue coming in for $1,000. If I come on back, I can click on any one of these charts, and it will take me directly into the Excel spreadsheet so that I can look at the data even more closely. So that's just using essentially the WAPI call, and I'll show you that in just a little bit, so that it calls directly into Excel services and displays this Excel document for me. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll come back here to my Windows 8 app. So if we look at this, here we can see that I have a new sales lead. Each of my icons represents a different status. Here I have a bid accepted, bid accepted. Here I have an estimate created. Here I have a bid submitted. So I have a number of different phases that a project is going through. This one here happens to be the new one that we just created, that was just created by a customer. So now as a salesperson, I pick this up and I go, oh, okay, I want to create an estimate for this. So I'll go ahead and create an estimate, and I'll say, okay, we'll keep it really simple. Item 1 is going to be, I'm going to have 10 of those at $100 each, and item 2 is going to have 20 of those at $10 each. So I have this $1,200 estimate going on here. Now, I'm the salesperson, I'm creating this estimate. But what I really need to have done is once this estimate is updated in the sales lead file, what I really need to have done is a statement of work created for Fabricam for this project that can be sent to the customer. Remember, I put an email address in there. Can be sent to the customer, and the customer can then approve this statement of work so that I can go ahead and we can earn their business and we can carry out the business. Now, I don't want to have somebody create that statement of work. I want the machine to create the statement of work because we have all the tools to do that. We have the OpenXML SDK. We have Word templates with content controls on them. Well, if that Word template with that statement of work template has content controls on it, these are known locations in a document that I can push data into programmatically using the OpenXML SDK, why can't I just have the machine make that statement of work on the fly? Better yet, why don't I just have that done as a part of a workflow activity? Well, that can all be done in that way. So once I click Save, this is going to update the SQL database with the lead estimate, the estimate on the sales lead, but it's also going to kick off a workflow that is going to create that statement of work and enter an approval process for that statement of work to be able to be approved and sent out. So we'll go ahead and click Save, and then it's going to send me a toast message through Windows Notification Services that an SOW has been created, a statement of work has been created. So we'll click Save. All right. So there we've clicked Saved, and here we have popping up our toast message that all those things I said were going to happen has happened, and here the statement of work has been created and the user has been notified. Now, that's the salesperson's job. But now the next level of work needs to be done by the sales manager. The sales manager has to look at that statement of work and be able to send it out, have it sent out to the customer. So let's go ahead and close this out. We'll come back here to our public-facing site here. And here you can see we have our internal projects, or our internal site. This is where all of our employees come. We think of this as our intranet site. We can look at our statement of work document library. And if we look at our statement of work, there is one that was created about a minute ago. So here's this the Fabricam fix right here. And so let's go ahead and go back. And our sales manager is Alan Brewer. And Alan, let's go ahead and refresh his OA. And Alan has just received, or should have just received, a statement of work here, approval. So we'll refresh him again. Sometimes it takes a minute for the workflow to kick over. Come on. Not yet. Give him a second. There are times you cannot count on how quickly the workflow is going to run for you. There we go. Okay, so we have just received our email now to Alan. This is an approval email, so we've started an approval workflow process. And a part of that workflow is to please approve the statement of work for the Fabricam TechEd fix. So we'll go ahead and click into the approval process. We click into the approval. We have the attached statement of work. And so let's look at that. We'll open that statement of work. Should take it a second here. Okay. So here you can see we have our statement of work that has been generated. Notice that what we've done is this is the statement of work that was automatically generated on the fly. We can see the client name is Fabricam. It goes to John. It's the TechEd fix. And the estimate is $1,200. So you can look at that, and we'll go ahead and edit the document. When we go into edit mode, you'll see that we also have a little app for Office here that also has the capability of reaching back into SharePoint and pulling out the same types of things that we are seeing on the Windows 8 app. But think about that little app on the side there for Office. That could be doing a number of things. That could be reaching out to other data services. That could be pulling together and aggregating other types of information that can help the sales manager be able to make the right decision about this statement of work. So in this case, we look at the statement of work and we go, yeah, this is all good. So we'll go ahead and close that down. And we will go ahead and now approve this item. So as Alan, as the sales manager, will approve this item. Once we approve this item, then it is now essentially sent out to the customer. Customer looks at the statement of work, decides, yeah, this is all good, so I'm going to go ahead and send it. Give the Contoso notice you get the toast message here. Contoso is going to go ahead and do the work for us. So we click on our leads and RFQs. And did you notice the little spinning thing there? Did that look familiar to anybody using 2010? That is an external list. So what I want to bring to mind here is that external lists can also be a part of your app. So when you deploy an app for SharePoint, you can also have an external list as a part of that app. It's not globally available like other external lists that you would create and make globally available across your enterprise. This is an app-level external list, which is really, really handy. So in this case, the information has come back from our customer. Our customer says, yeah, let's go ahead and start this work. So we'll go to our TechEd fix here. We'll edit the item. And we now have a bid accepted. And so we'll change this to bid accepted. Once I change this to bid accepted, what's going to happen is that we are going to create a new subsite within our SharePoint site that is going to be able to be used for this project. So this again is the app coming in, the MVC4 app coming in on the behalf of the app and generating a new project site. So here we'll go back to Contoso compressors. We will look in our projects, and given that all of that has completed, we'll go into site contents for our subsites. And here is our new TechEd fix site that has been created. So now with this project, we've had our statement of work created automatically by the machine. We have also had a subsite that is now created here for all the documents and the news feed and anything that we want to have happen in discussion, collaboration around this project. We can even, with SharePoint 2013, we could potentially even share this site out to our external partners so they could even look at this site too. So all of that in an end-to-end solution. So it brings together Windows 8, it brings together Windows Azure websites, it brings together Windows notification services. So let's go ahead and take some time here now and see how this all comes together. Okay. So just by way of review, there are 3 hosting choices that you have the opportunity to make as developers for your apps for SharePoint. The first one is SharePoint hosted apps. These apps have all of their artifacts 100% in SharePoint. There is no code behind on these apps. These apps need to, any code that they run needs to run in the browser. So that would be the use of JavaScript, and we have the client-side object model for JavaScript that you can use, or you can use the REST endpoints and OData endpoints on our API. There are 2 types of cloud-based apps, okay, that you can have. One is the provider-hosted app. The provider-hosted app runs outside of SharePoint. It's hosted on any server that you want to host it on. It's written in any language you want to write it in. That's a provider-hosted app. So your app runs outside of SharePoint. Now for us, we would like that to land on Windows Azure. That's a nice choice, but it's your choice. So that's provider-hosted apps. There is a special type of app that is called auto-hosted. Now, auto-hosted is essentially a provider-hosted app. The only thing is, you don't have to find a provider for that. SharePoint Online will automatically, if you create an auto-hosted app, SharePoint Online will automatically provision in its own reserved space a Windows Azure website and a Windows Azure SQL database that can accompany that site. So this is kind of nice if you don't want to be in the hosting business. There are going to be some limitations once with the size of that Windows Azure website, how many users it's going to be able to support, how big that SQL Azure database is going to be able to be provisioned for you. Those kinds of decisions will be forthcoming. But as these come out toward, sometime, I would think, yet in this calendar year, just be watching for these. That once auto-hosted apps become available, then these are potential ways for you to write your apps for Office that are automatically hosted from a SharePoint Online perspective into Windows Azure websites. However, bottom line is, once you install that app, there is no management of that Windows Azure website by the developer. If you want to manage the website to scale up and scale down and do that type of thing, you need to be using the full provider-hosted app model. Okay, so in our case, we have 2 provider-hosted apps. The underscore API is the new endpoint that everybody should be using. The underscore API, if those of you that have done development in the past, you've used underscore VTI bin, okay, or the ASMX, or all that kind of stuff. This is the endpoint. This is the OAuth-enabled endpoint. So if you want to use OAuth with your solutions, this is the OAuth-enabled endpoint. This is the endpoint going forward for SharePoint that lets you, again, treat SharePoint as a service. It's OAuth-enabled, and this is the endpoint that has been so deepened and broadened. CSOM essentially hits this endpoint, as well as REST and OData compatible. So if you can't do something you want to do with this underscore API endpoint, let us know. The other enabling technology with SharePoint 2013 that makes the OAuth piece possible is that now we have the all-new app principle, which is, we're used to the user principle, but we now have an app principle. And an app principle, like a user principle, can have its own set of permissions. So the app is going to be trusted to do things on SharePoint. Now, those of you that are developing in test, you are going to use this endpoint on SharePoint, the SharePoint site, whether it's SharePoint on premises or whether it's SharePoint Online. Let's put it this way. For SharePoint Online, you are going to need to register your app and create an app ID and an app secret. So once you register that information and the redirect URL with the AppReg new page, this is for development only, then you can host your app, your provider-hosted app, outside of SharePoint on any service you want. And your app, when it comes back in, you're going to put these in your web.config file. And when your app comes into SharePoint and does the OAuth dance, then you are going to provide these, the client ID and the client secret in that process. Now, that's pretty straightforward to be able to do with the way we've written the token helper class that you've probably heard about this week. And but when you take your app and you make your app publicly available, okay? Now, as long as this is for your internal use only, on your website, your SharePoint site alone, AppReg new is fine. But if you're going to have an app for SharePoint that goes into the store on office.com, then you have to have a client ID and secret that is essentially globally available to access control services. And so when you are going through the process, the seller dashboard process, you will generate a client ID and a client secret in the seller dashboard process that is going to be known to access control services globally. So that way your app can come into any SharePoint site worldwide that your app is installed in, and your client ID and secret is known to Windows Azure Access Control Services, again, globally. But once you register your app with Access Control Services, then when your app is installed into the SharePoint site, the user is going to get a consent prompt. Just like when you install apps on your phone, it's going to say, hey, this app is going to do these things. Do you want to do it? None of us read it? Yes, we want this thing. All right? Well, admins on SharePoint sites are probably going to be a little bit more concerned about what this app is going to do on their SharePoint site. But this app is going to be trusted on the site when it's installed by somebody that has the permission level to be able to trust it. Because when the app requests these permissions, like it's going to read and write data to some document library or whatever it's going to do, the person that grants the permissions has to have that set of that permission level that the app is requesting. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to be trusted. Also, this trust is a one-choice trust. In other words, everything that this app wants to do, you say yes to. You don't get to choose, well, I like it to do this, but not this. No, but that's really for you as developers, so that you know that the app is always in the state at a permission level that you have expected it to run at. So there's no picking and choosing of the app permissions. Here this trusted is, if you trust it, your app is trusted, and it can do the things that it's asked for. Okay, so the app principal makes it available now, makes your app available now to be able to come into SharePoint and do things. So the authentication that this brings to the table is a little bit different now, additive in a different way, to the way we have known SharePoint authentication in the past. So typically, this is our SharePoint authentication. User credentials are provided, yes. Now there is an additional question that's asked. Is this call into an app web? You have a host web, and apps are installed into an app web underneath a host web, okay? So is this call trying to get at that app web level? If no, it's not. It's just a standard call. We're just hitting a site collection or some document library. Then essentially what SharePoint does is it mints this user-only context. It's always done this. It still does this. It mints a user-only context, and the user is in, and the user can do the things that they have permissions to do. But if the answer to that question is yes, the call is into an app web, okay, now we mint a user plus app context, okay, because the user is coming in, but also we're going to the app level, and that app is a principal with permissions as well. So now we have a user plus app context, and the user gets access. But SharePoint knows now there is this context of user plus app. Okay, so let's let that sit for just a second. If the user did not provide credentials, for whatever reason, we have, and there is no app token provided, I'll come back to that, then essentially what we have is an anonymous context, and the user gets access in an anonymous context. That's exactly the same as it always has been. But this second question here, app token provided. because the app has an ID, the app can come into SharePoint and do stuff on its own now, if you want it to. It can also come in with a user on it. But because we're using OAuth and these access tokens, and access tokens can be cached on your back-end server, potentially you have a process that the user came in at one point into the app web and did something, you cache their token, but then you have some long-running process where now you need to go back into SharePoint. The user isn't on anymore, but the access token has the user and app as a part of it, and your app needs to come back now and check something in SharePoint, but it still needs to be in the user's context, although it's just the app coming in with the user. So, is an app token provided, an access token provided? If it includes the user, then SharePoint is going to generate a user plus app context. But again, the app is a principal that can come into SharePoint and do stuff that the trust it button said it could do. The app can now come in without any user and use an app-only context, and because it was trusted to be able to do these things, it can now do things against SharePoint. So you have these 4 different authentication endpoints that can be present for SharePoint. You can have a user-only, a user plus app, an app-only, or an anonymous context. So the 2 in the middle are the ones that are new to us with 2013, and that's all because of OAuth. Now, that's very powerful for us. That's the kind of stuff we couldn't ever do before in 2010. That's the kind of stuff in 2010 in a sandbox solution. You had to have some security principle with a user ID and a password that had certain level of privileges that you could come in and do stuff. You had to use a username and password. With OAuth, we don't need that now. We can have this type of OAuth flow for permissions and authentication take place for us. Okay, now the question typically is okay, so I have a user and I have an app and the user has permissions and the app has permissions, who wins? Well, it's the intersection of the two. If the user can do it and the app can't, it can't be done. SharePoint won't carry it out. If the app can do it but the user can't, then the SharePoint won't do it. It's only what the app and the user can do, that's the permission set that's allowed at any given point. Okay? So you can think of this in terms of, let's say, an expense app. You write a little expense app. And in the expense app, you don't want users to be able to approve their own expenses. However, you do want a rule that says, hey, if this expense is under $50, I want to be able to auto-approve it. But you don't want the user to do that, but you do want the app to do that. So you can have logic in your program then that says, okay, how much is the expense? Now, when the app is installed, somebody in HR or AP or whatever said, trust it. I trust this app to be able to do something at this level. So in that case, what happens is you can have business logic that says, hey, is the expense under $50? Well, the user can't do it, so let me call into SharePoint as the app-only principal and approve that, and the user isn't on that transaction. Now, that will be recorded in SharePoint as an app principal making that update. Okay? And so anytime if you have like the user in the app or the app only, SharePoint tracks that. So that's a part of the record inside of SharePoint. And if the app does something on behalf of the user, it will say updated by app blah 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 on behalf of Bing. You know, Bing, you probably shouldn't use that word. And on behalf of so-and-so. Okay? So all of that is audible, trackable, and reportable. Okay, so let's take a look now at the Office 365, essentially the public site. So to submit the request for quote, this again, provider-hosted MVC4 application, runs on Windows Azure websites, uses the Chrome control, hits an OData endpoint to update the database for Windows Azure. So let's go ahead and take a look at some code here. All right, so we are on the Index ASPX page, and you'll notice here, first of all, I just want to let's just look over at the project here. So with every, whoops, sorry about that. With every app for SharePoint, you're going to have two projects in the solution. You're going to have your SharePoint only side of the project, and you're going to have your website. Okay? So in this case, that website is just an MVC4 application, and we have our SharePoint part of the project that is going to be actually installed into SharePoint. We have the app manifest up there at the top. So every SharePoint app is going to have an app manifest. It's going to be installed into SharePoint. So that's that part of it. And we'll look at that a little bit more closely in the next app. But what I want us to see here is that, all right, what do we have going on? The first thing we have going on here is we're going to simply do a check on, on the user agent. Okay? So we're going to do a check on the user agent because this app can also, this web application can also be hit from devices. So we need to see what kind of device, because we're going to make some decisions on what we present in the web page if it's a device and not just a PC-based browser. But the second thing that I want us to look at here is this piece of code right here. So the Chrome control is a control provided by Microsoft. And again, this is something you don't have to write. You can just use this, but you can do some augmentation to this to add some customization, or you can actually write your own. But if you use the Chrome control that we provide, this is how you get it. Notice the decode URI component there, get the query string parameter. In SharePoint, anytime we hit a provider-hosted app, we also pass what we call these standard tokens. We also pass into the provider-hosted app this one parameter called SP host URL, because that provider-hosted app who's hitting me? I'm just an app out here. Who sent me this? Well, that app, your provider-hosted app, has to be able to get back to the SharePoint site that just called it. So the SP host URL is a standard parameter that is always passed into your provider-hosted app. So you can just simply, we have a nice little method here. You can just parse that out, and essentially you can get the host URL. So that is the site that just called into your app, the SharePoint site. And we are going to go to the layouts15 directory, and we're going to grab this spuicontrol.js file. So we're going to pull that down. Okay? So this is just reaching back into SharePoint from your provider-hosted app, reaching back into SharePoint, and getting the .js file for the Chrome control. And then we have a callback function here that says, okay, once you get that out of SharePoint, I'm going to wait for you, but once you get that out of SharePoint, as soon as you have that, then I want you to call this function here. So we'll come down to the, let me just come down here to the render Chrome control function. And so here we're going to render the Chrome control, and essentially, this is where we just simply write it into the document. And where does it write in? Right here, we have a div tag that is just simply a placeholder for that Chrome control to go. So at the top of the body, we are simply going to put in our Chrome control tag, and then boom, we'll let the HTML page go ahead and render. But we have arbitrarily been accessed from potentially any SharePoint site in the world, and now we have to be able to get back to that, but we want to make sure that we are themed according to what that site is themed, and the Chrome control lets us be able to do that. Okay, so the other thing that's a little bit interesting here is, all right, so we have a couple decisions that we're going to make here based on the is mobile. So if it's not is mobile, we're going to use just this a date picker, because this is just an ASPX page for an IE browser or Chrome or whatever. But if it's a mobile device, then we want to use this JS file here, and we want to render this special date picker. So that's just the way that we are allowing this web page to morph itself based upon how it's being viewed. Is it being viewed in a browser desktop, or is it being viewed on a device? So we're doing that. Now, we also have just the submit click. So once we submit here, what we are doing is we're just grabbing the values out of the text boxes. We're popping those into our model. And then we are putting together, we're just creating here the URL, building up the URL to be able to call into and post to our submit sales lead REST endpoint. So if we come into home controllers here, here's our HTTP post, here's our REST endpoint for submit sales lead. We pass in the model for our sales leads. We pull out of the model, we dump it into our entity data model here, and we do simply save changes. So this is where we're updating our SQL database. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we are going to call our send notification function here. And send notification, we'll take a look at this. Send notification is just going to do a couple things for us. It's going to build up a little parameter here that we're going to pass into Windows Notification Services. We're going to build up the project name, and we're going to take the project dynamically from what was passed in, and we're going to parameterize and company, and we're going to take the company name, and we're going to pass that in. And then, notice here, we are going to call, essentially, this internal SharePoint host remote URL. And that is the Windows Azure MVC4 app that is what I like to think of as my main backbone app. And so that has does all of the main work for us, and that has this REST endpoint that anytime I want to send a notification, I have some REST endpoints on that middle tier that will accept these notifications calls. So notice in this case, I am going to do the send notification template 1. And I construct my URL, I pass in my data parameters that are going to go across the wire with that REST call, and that essentially is this app's work. It updates the entity data model with the SQL, so SQL Azure can be updated with this lead, and it formulates a REST-based call to my middle tier to send this Windows notification service, this Windows notification. Okay, so that's the work based on the submit request for quote app. And it's pretty straightforward. That's just all that it does. Okay, so Windows Push Notification Services. This is a service that's available to you, and I can show you the URL a little bit later, but you can read about Windows Push Notification Services. But any third-party cloud app, any cloud app that you have, can send push notifications out, and whether they're Tile or Badge or Toast, I just use Toast and Tile, can send those updates out to a Windows 8 app. So you register a channel with Windows Notification Services, you get a client ID and secret, and you can talk to Windows Notification Services, and you just generate some XML, and that XML message that you create, you send out through a REST call to Windows Notification Services. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here we have our internal app. And again, two things I just want to show here. Again, with, so again, with any provider-hosted app, you have your SharePoint piece over in the projects. You have your SharePoint artifacts, and you have your web application. In your SharePoint artifacts, now when we look at this, essentially my middle tier internal app, I call this my workhorse app. This has lots of stuff under the SharePoint piece because I have lots of things that I want in SharePoint. I have my external content type for my external list. I have my workflow. I have some additional document libraries. So this is just all SharePoint-y artifact kind of stuff that when my app is installed into its app web, all of these things get pushed into there. Okay? And that's done with essentially a WSP. So that is my SharePoint part of the project. But then also down here, I have my web side of the project. And it has a lot of parts, and it, again, too, is just an MVC. It's just an MVC4 app. So the services controller here, on my services controller, this is where I call into when I want to be able to hand off the information to send the Windows push notification services, to send the Windows push notifications. So you'll see here is, okay, that's a different one. Here's my send notification template 1. So that's the method that I'm hitting on my REST call from my public app. And you can see that this is just simply making a call into the WNS utility for this specific template. It's passing in the project name and the company as parameters. We also have a send notification template 2. This one is going to happen when the SOW is has been accepted. We also have a send notification template 3. This one is going to be called when the sales lead, what happens? I think when the sales lead is accepted. And then I have a send notification template 4 as well. So these are all just REST endpoints that take a different parameter, but they are going to call into methods on my Windows Notification Services utility here. Now let me go ahead and minimize this. Now this looks like a lot of goo here, but really all I'm doing is formatting strings because I'm creating the XML that I want to just have passed over on a REST call to my Windows Notification Services channel. So here you can see that here's my message. Please create, I hate it when it does that. It says, please create an estimate for this project and this company. So that's where I'm just popping in the parameters for the project and the company. And then I do some work here about setting the tile so that in this case I also want to be able to update those tiles that are rotating on the tile on my Windows 8 app. So that's send notification template 1, send notification template 2. Here, an SOW is created for this project and company. Send notification template 3, please schedule a project kickoff meeting. So all I'm doing is constructing the XML that I'm going to put on a REST call and pass to Windows Notification Services. How do I do that? So I come up here. Here is my send tile notification method. And in this case, what I do is I have to get the access token, and there's a method down here for the access token. This is essentially where I call out to Windows Notification Services. I hand it my client ID and secret. I get an access token handed back to me because it says, yeah, I know you, you can do this. And I put that access token then on my call, my REST call, into Windows Notification Services, and boom, it's done. So There seems like a lot of steps here, but these are absolutely well-documented steps. You can use these on MSDN. You can just take the steps and put your code in and make it happen. So Windows Notification Services is really a nice, powerful tool. But also with workflow. So this is the XAML representation of workflow. Sorry, it's a little bit small there. But if you just look at this in the workflow designer, it just says HTTP GET, all right, in a box. So to show you what's underneath the covers on the properties of that, it's a little easier to show you here. So here in the workflow, so that the workflow, when it's creating the SOW, after it gets done creating the SOW, it simply constructs the remote URL, which essentially is the parameter for the SharePoint site, adds the rest of the information, or the remote URL, which is essentially the parameter for the Windows Azure website, and it calls the services layer, it calls send notification, and again, it pops on the project ID as a parameter and passes that down into my middle tier app on its REST endpoint, and again, that calls out to Windows Notification Services. So I've called out from there. But also, if I go over to my Windows 8 app, so in my Windows 8 app, let me come down here, it's essentially the same type of thing. So as soon as I do my estimate page, when I click the button on the estimate page in my Windows 8 app, it's going to construct the URL endpoint for the REST call. It's going to use my Windows Azure value that has been stored in a config file. And again here, you can simply see that we're just using the same pattern. We're sending the REST call to send notification template 2, and we are going to provide in the JSON stringify the project ID and the data that the parameters that need to go with the REST call to. So again, it's just a pattern that once you get into it, you go, oh, okay, it just works. I can make that happen myself. All right. The other thing, just to browse real quickly on the Windows 8 app, is that the Windows 8 app also makes a REST call into my OData service, my leads OData service on my middle tier, and it retrieves the sales lead data. When the sales lead gets unpacked and I start cycling through each of my sales leads, I determine which image, it'd be based on the different statuses of the project, determine which icon to show, and then I just grab the data that has been passed in off the JSON from JSON, and I populate the various information into the file, and then that's just essentially it. So nothing real fancy there going on. Okay, just rounding third here. You go, thank you. All right, so sending push notification services. We have the public site that calls the internal Windows Azure website, which the REST call, which formulates the call to the push notifications. We get identified out here in the Windows 8 platform with the toast. Then also the tiles are updated in the Windows 8 app. But then also the Windows 8 app can call another REST endpoint in the Windows Azure internal MVC4 site. And again, it can push notifications. And we just saw that. And then also we saw that workflow can call a REST endpoint and build out the notifications. And that's it. Now, push notifications, though, aren't just for SharePoint. They can be used for anything, but if you're in SharePoint, you can fire these push notifications off of event receivers, off of remote event receivers. You can have things happening in external systems that you want to fire a toast message about. Timer jobs or worker roles. Timer jobs if you are happen to be in a SharePoint on-premises environment. Worker roles could be another way to implement timer jobs out in Windows Azure. custom code. So you can trigger these notifications from any point. The Windows 8 app, we saw the Windows 8 app. It does the tile and toast notifications. It hits the middle tier OData. It renders the Azure or the Excel services data for the charts and the graphs. And we have any SharePoint extension point or API that we want to be able to hit, we can also hit. One thing in the Windows Metro app here, one thing to just call out is that, so right here when we load up the clickable image on the chart, we put this URL behind it, _layouts. It uses the SharePoint site URL, but _layouts 15 WAPI ASMX code. And then we build that out with the actual URL for the document, the Excel document. And so we can see that here, the Excel document. So here we are actually putting that clickable link on that document so that when they click that document, it goes to the browser and it displays the page using the WAPI protocol. And then also here we have simply the charts that we're hitting on. In this case, we're hitting the _VTI bin, and we're pulling back the charts that we want that are specifically labeled on there. So that's the integration with Windows Azure. For the SharePoint site, the internet, we use it for document storage. The SOWs are created. We save the document template out there. We pull it out when we need it. For business intelligence, we use Excel services. We have an external app level external content type. And for collaboration, we automatically build the project sites. OAuth is what makes it all possible to reach back in and create the documents, upload the documents, update SharePoint list items, and create the sales team. So just to show you just a little bit of code here on the internal site, here I have my utility to create, here I have my utility that is going to create my statement of work documents. And essentially, this is where I use Token Helper, and I use my access token to be able to call back into SharePoint, pull the template out. Here I'm just using the OpenXML SDK. Once I pull the template out, I push data into the content controls that are there, and then I save the document back into SharePoint, and I have the document named here. I create the document name here based on my parameters. But once it saves the document there, the title of the document isn't right. So then I call back into SharePoint, and I get the list item that I just created, and I push in the project ID, and I create the title of the document so that it matches the document docx file. Okay. So the app for Office, again, it wasn't anything real fancy. There is a great article out on dev.office.com if you drill down into the building apps for SharePoint. There's also a document about apps that ask for permission on the fly. The beauty of this model of asking permissions on the fly is that you can arbitrarily access any Office 365 site, and when you access the site, the user is going to be prompted for their credentials. They enter it. They get a trust it prompt. If they trust it, then your app can go ahead and access that site with that level of permissions. So you can get permissions on the fly and data out of SharePoint, again, treating it as a service without ever having to install an app onto SharePoint. So that's really nice. Workflow Manager, the beauty of Workflow Manager is it's now powered by Windows Azure. Workflow Manager runs using the app model. Okay, so data is handed off to Workflow Manager. Workflow Manager comes back into SharePoint, treats it as a service using the exact same app model as you are using with OAuth. So in review, we have this new cloud app model. It really gives you the opportunity to build a whole new type of applications against SharePoint, treating it as a service. It has these core enabling technologies now with the new _ API, the new app principle, and using OAuth. So what do? What can you do today? Number one, go to dev.office.com, sign up for a developer site, install the tools using the web platform installer, browse apps for Office and SharePoint samples on dev.office.com, and then read some blogs, and I'll try and keep mine updated better than I have in the past. All right, so that's your stuff. Okay, so I know we're close on time here, like 20 seconds left. I can take some questions here, but again, I'm going to be down in the Office booth in the app section. I'll go down there immediately after this, and I'll talk to you again as long as you want. Are there any quick questions? Yes, sir. Okay, yeah, so the question is, when I say app-level external content type, does the BDC model, it resides in the app level, okay? So it's available to the app. It's not available just globally.
So does that mean if I build a PHP application, the external
yes.
connection would reside in that application?
Yeah, we need to talk about that, but because your PHP application is a provider hosted, but you can come in and talk to that external list using the API, okay? So nothing of your PHP lives in the app inside of SharePoint, just the external list. Yes? I'm sorry, but I can't make this demo broadly available. But all of the pieces of this are going to be pulled out and on MSDN as code samples. It's just that I can't give the end-to-end demo to you. I would love to, but legal won't let me do that. Yeah, okay. All right, thank you all very much for making it this early in the morning, and we'll see you.